deranged, unhinged, sad, depressed, you name it. These women are just not okay. I don't know how many red flags I've raised in this video, but don't worry, I'm good. Or I will be. Hello, my friends. Hi, I hope you're doing wonderful. I hope you're taking care of yourselves. I feel like it's been forever since I last challenged myself for a reading video. And I thought, you know, why not do this really interesting, really amazing God tier content for you guys. It's sort of going to become the standard of what every YouTuber should do. You've heard of reading TikTok's favorite books or TikTok's most popular books, but have you heard of reading Bookstagram's most famous books or reading Bookstagram's favorite books? I think you have not, because I am a pioneer. I am the standard. I am paving the way for other people. And I'm glad to do it. I just thought it would be a good old time. I thought it would be really interesting to see how it would be to read some of the books that I am constantly seeing on my Bookstagram, whether it is on my Explore page or just like random posts that appear on my feed because of the algorithm that nobody understands. I just kind of gathered the books that I saw the most, and I decided to go ahead and buy them and read them and just see why they're so famous, why people won't stop taking pictures of them, if they're just taken for the aesthetic or if they're actually good books. Like, we need to know. And I feel like I'm not the only one asking this question, but I am the only one brave enough to actually go out and read these books. So let's go ahead and introduce the books that I've decided to do this experiment on. The first book that I'm going to be reading for this reading experiment is The Bell Jar, written by Sylvia Plath. The amount of posts that talk about Sylvia Plath and talk specifically about the bell jar, you can't really count them. There's just too many of them. And I also feel, because I've been reading the unabridged journals of Sylvia Plath, my Instagram kind of like tugged that up. It kind of listened to me and was like, okay, so this is the next step. It's going to be interesting to read Plath's only novel as I'm reading how much she's struggling with her creative process and her creative journey. So it's definitely going to be a heightened reading experience just because I do have this backup material to feed into sort of the psyche of the author as she was writing this. This next one I've seen on so many different people's profiles and Explore pages. It's like I'm the last person to pick up this book, but this is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Tessa Mosfag. This one, I do know what it's about because it's sort of become part of this aesthetic almost, where it's really about this era of unhinged women just sort of vibing, just sort of taking hold of their lives and deciding to do nothing with them. And I feel like that's a big power move, to just decide to sleep for a whole year because you can't be bothered to live. It's nicer than the alternative, I'll give you that for sure. I just want to know why people are so fascinated by this book. From what I understand, it's literally just a woman sleeping for a whole year. So I don't know how that's going to translate into an interesting read, but color me excited, I guess. Yeah, like I need to understand why this keeps popping up in my Explore page. The next book I'm going to be reading has a really beautiful cover. The title though, it kind of like, it clashes with the cover because the cover is so simplistic and it's so innocent. And then the title is like, hold up, what? The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides, hopefully I'm saying that right. This apparently is a classic. I've never actually heard of this before, but apparently it's like this huge thing. It also has a cult following. I don't understand why. Like, literally, if we're basing the plot off of the title and of the little description that we have here, this is literally the story of girls who do this. For this one, I'm really interested in seeing if people only photograph this for the aesthetic, because of course, hi, hello, like it even matches my nails, sort of. So I can see the aesthetic side of this book, but I want to see if this book has more than just an aesthetic value. Like, I want to see if the book itself is actually good. What I'm seeing from these 3 popular Bookstagram books is that Bookstagram really loves unhinged women. They really love when women just go off the rails. They love women exploring lunacy, apparently. Like, that's kind of like the gist that I'm getting. So I'm really excited to see why. Also, the fact that this isn't really my usual reading taste. I wouldn't normally gravitate towards these types of books. So I'm also sort of very much stepping out of my comfort zone, and that's also really exciting. I normally just tend to stick to the stuff that I know I'm gonna love. So this is a reading challenge on 2 parts, just because I'm reading out of my comfort zone and I'm reading books I have no idea what they're about, and I'm reading to see if Bookstagram has taste. I feel like these books also fit into this trope that has been gaining traction for the past few years, which is the sad girl hours, as well as the unhinged women trope. I feel like a combination of those two is what we're seeing with these books. And I'm really interested to see why. Why are we obsessed with being sad, being depressed, and being unhinged? I want answers, and hopefully I'll find them. Otherwise, maybe I'll just convert into yet another unhinged woman who people write books about. Anyways, wish me luck. Let's have some fun. This beat is sick. Enough talking, let's get to reading. Right, I'm gonna need like 2 shots, but apart from that, I'm great. I'm fantastic. I've finished reading this, The Virgin Suicides, by Jeffrey Eugenides? Jeffrey, Mr. Jeffrey. Sorry. Actually, no, I'm not sorry. This is going to be interesting because how do I even explain this book? In its most simplistic terms, this is the story narrated by a chorus of boys who are trying to reconstruct the events that led to this suicide of the Lisbon girls. So these girls, the Lisbon girls, they are a group of 5 sisters, and they have lived a very secluded life. Their parents are very strict, they're very severe, they're very religious, which leads to them having a very secluded existence, bordering on abuse. We never really get any evidence, but I think it's quite obvious that these girls were just screaming for help. It's so interesting to me because we never actually get to meet these girls beyond the recollection of the boys that are narrating this story. And the thing is that these boys have turned these girls into legends. They are so high up on these made-up pedestals that it's almost impossible to consider these girls as humans. Through the male gaze, these girls have been dehumanized. They have been villainized as well. They've been idolized in a way that's just impossible to think anything is real about them. They almost feel like a myth. And it's so sad because at the end of the day, these girls were just begging for someone to save them or for someone to help them. But people were so busy idolizing them and sort of just seeing them from afar that they never really took the time to try and understand them. It really delves deep into some really hard-hitting topics. But I just like the writing and the way that Mr. Jeffrey decided to tell this story. It was done so well. I just had such an interesting time analyzing this book and sort of trying to put myself in the shoes of the boys at the same time as trying to put myself in the shoes of the girls that we barely even knew. Throughout their lives, these boys that are now men, but they've sort of become frozen in time because they've been so obsessed with reconstructing the events that led to such a tragic ending. And because of that, they've sort of just not really lived their own lives. They're always looking for these girls in everything they say and everything they do. They never really put them to rest. I just think it's ironic how these boys, these men, spend the entirety of this book trying to piece together the lives of these girls. The primary purpose isn't really to honor these girls, but to glamorize and romanticize their own feelings that they called love, but in reality, you can't really love someone that you don't know or that you didn't even try to get to know. It's really hard to like explain why I am so fascinated by this book because of course, this is not like a favorite book. I did not have a good time reading this just because the topic was so heavy. But I just found it so fascinating. So basically throughout this whole book, we're just trying to uncover the mystery of why these girls decided to do what they did. But ultimately, it's not really even about them. Like, we know so little beyond what we see from the men's perspective that it's so hard to form an honest opinion about them or like to know who they truly were. And I think that's really the most tragic thing of all. We never got to know these girls who were supposed to be the main characters, but they just ended up being a plot device to further these boys' lives and their own problems and traumas or whatever. I'm telling you, I had such an interesting experience reading this. I don't see myself recommending this book to a lot of people, but there is definitely some value to be obtained beyond its aesthetic purpose. So I'm just so confused as to why I found this so fascinating. Like, if you see my annotations, there's just so much to think about. I honestly do not know how to explain this. I'm just so fascinated by this book. And even though I wouldn't recommend it to a lot of people, maybe not even any people, I do think that this book was very interesting and I don't regret reading this. I don't know what I want to rate this because I don't know if what I loved was the book or the experience of reading this, which it sounds like it's the same thing, but it's really not. Your reading experience can be better than the book itself, and that's just something that I don't really understand. So I think I'm gonna have to sit on this rating for a while just because I think I need to think this through. But I had a really good time reading this. It was a really interesting introspective read, top tier unhinged content. But hey, I guess that's what I signed up for. So here's hoping the other books confuse me a little less. But hopefully they're just as entertaining. That's such a weird word to use in this context because you know what? I'm gonna stop babbling away and I'm just gonna move on. But yeah, first book down. I feel weird. I feel confused. I don't know who or where I am right now. I don't like this feeling of confusion, but I am welcoming it, which is, I'm gonna shut up. I need to go. Bye-bye. Unhinged women, it's the new normal. Hi, hello, hi, hi. Can you tell that I'm losing my mind? Can you tell that maybe I've found that there's a reason all of these women are unhinged? Maybe they're onto something, you know what I mean? And I think I'm finally starting to get it. My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Atessa Mossfag. Hello, hi. This was interesting, to say the least. Yeah, I just don't really know how to feel about My Year of Rest and Relaxation. Like, it's so weird. The main character, the unnamed main character, which I found interesting because like throughout the whole book, she just remains unidentifiable. She remains unknown. You don't leave your main character unnamed for no reason. So I feel like that definitely adds to the theme of confusion and the loss of identity and sense of self. So that was definitely an interesting theme to explore. This book tells the story of this woman who's sort of fed up with life. She hates everything, she hates everyone, and she's decided to just sleep for a whole year. She just wants to hibernate because she feels like if she sleeps for the entirety of a year, all of her negative and traumatized cells are going to regenerate. And when she wakes up, she's going to be this new and improved version of herself who's no longer going to be in pain, who's no longer going to be suffering. So, you know, instead of like a normal human being, instead of going to therapy and talking to people and seeking help, she thinks that the only solution to her problems is sleep. And honestly, I'm sorry, this might be a red flag, but I do understand the sentiment. Sleep felt productive. Something was getting sorted out. I knew in my heart, this was perhaps the only thing my heart knew back then, that when I'd slept enough, I'd be okay. I'd be renewed, reborn. I would be a whole new person. Every one of my cells regenerated enough times that the old cells were just distant, foggy memories. My past life would be but a dream, and I could start over without regrets, bolstered by the bliss and serenity that I would have accumulated in my year of rest and relaxation. So that's kind of like the mindset of this woman, this white privileged woman in her 20s living in New York City, Upper East Side. She's rich, she's like old money rich, she's never had to work for anything in her life. So as you can see, it's very easy to hate her. It's very easy to not wish her the best. This main character was built to be hated, or not hated, just very unliked. She literally has zero redeeming qualities. She's not a good person, she's not a good friend, she's not a good daughter. She's just really the antithesis of a good human being. And I think that Atessa Mosfeg is so brave for doing that. You know that one saying, that one thing we all say when we're kind of going through a rough patch and we're just like, I wish I could just go to sleep, and when I wake up, everything's resolved and I don't have to think about this anymore. I feel like this girly pop, she took that to the extreme and actually tried to do that, which, okay, props to you. I mean, sure, if you can do that, why not? It's your life that you're wasting away. So we're basically just following this main character as she takes more and more sleeping pills, trying to just sleep her life away. And the moments where she is awake, she is unbearable. She's this horrible human being. And I don't know if I was interested in this, if I was fascinated by this. I'm just left feeling weird. I don't know if I'm jealous that she can do this, like just sleep, but also the way that she went about it, I don't, like, that's just, I don't, yeah. It also has like this weird low-key type of humor, and I just, like, there were times where it wasn't really a joke, but I was laughing just because of the absurdity of it all. This was a very disorienting story, and I think it was an interesting read, but there were some times where I just felt like it was repetitive, of course, because it was just our main character taking pills, falling asleep, waking up, being disoriented, taking more pills, going back to sleep. And it was just like this cycle, and sometimes we got some really interesting insights. Sometimes we did explore some of our main character's traumas, like what led her to become like this and to seek such extreme measures of disappearing and restoring herself by hibernation. It's kind of horrifying. It's kind of terrifying that so many people relate to this book and they can see themselves in this main character, because that's kind of terrifying. The fact that so many people feel and relate to this awful human being. I mean, I do to some extent relate to wanting to sleep just to feel better. I feel like we already do that by taking normal naps. Naps are great. Naps are fun. I would recommend naps to this person and to you if you think that this is in any sort of way correct and not delusional. This just took Unhinged to a whole other level. I feel like this is the epitome of an unhinged woman, and she's also a little bit of a manipulator, which is fun, which is great. I support women's rights, but I also support women's wrongs, and there are a lot of wrong things in this book. It was a good time to an extent, even though it's a pretty short book. It only has 289 pages, so only short of 300 pages. Even though it's such a short book, I still feel like it could have been maybe 50 to 60 pages shorter, but that's just me. Now that I finished my year of rest and relaxation, I feel like that was a fever dream, quite literally. That was just an experience. I am so excited to finally pick up The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. I have read around the first maybe 50 pages, and I've just been having, I've read the first 69 pages. Hi. I think I'm going to love this book. I think this is probably going to be my favorite out of the other two that I've read, just because, like I mentioned in the introduction, I have been reading her journals, so I feel like I do have this unique, it's not unique because everybody who reads this obviously is going to have the same insight, but I do feel like I have this extra insight into The Bell Jar because at times it just feels very autobiographical. Our main character, Esther, she actually really mirrors, and she portrays a lot of the feelings and emotions that Sylvia talks about in her journals. And every time I find those similarities, it's sort of like shocking, because I can remember so vividly some journal entries where Sylvia was struggling with her creative and personal path, and how she struggled to find meaning in her life, and how she struggled with depression and anxiety. So I feel like in a way, writing The Bell Jar must have been such a cathartic experience for Sylvia, because she could explore those feelings and those negative emotions in a way that was fictionalized. So in a way, it was easier to sort of write down, because she separated herself from those feelings and put them in somebody else. I'm just really fascinated by this book so far, and my coffee is cold, I'm sorry, but I do need to hold this up just because, you know, the aesthetic of reading classics, coffee, hot girl, come on now. We're following our main character, who's called Esther, and this is set in the 1950s in New York City, and I think it does a really interesting job at portraying the stereotypes and the customs of 1950s American society, because of course women were not having a great time in the 1950s. Women were not thriving. Women barely had any rights. Our main character is really struggling with the expectations that society has set on her and women in general, and then the expectations that she's set for herself. So it's sort of like this inner fight, this inner struggle, inner turmoil that our main character is going through as she's trying to sort of live in this world that's not made for women, and it's so hard. Women were expected to fill out this traditional list of things. She has to cook, she has to clean, she has to be good at house chores, and that's about it. You can't have any other aspirations. As soon as you're married, you've just become a housewife. You're no longer human. You're just kind of there to make a man's life easier. And our main character is sort of struggling with this because, of course, nobody wants that for themselves. It's also interesting to me how this book is sort of reminiscent of My Year of Rest and Relaxation, because both main characters are sort of these passive personalities. They don't really do anything. What's the opposite of development, when somebody is just like unraveling? It's this really interesting unraveling of a character who's just sort of losing her sense of self. She's really struggling to even recognize herself when she looks at herself in the mirror, and I think it has to do with her development of mental illness the more that she progresses through life, which has also just been really interesting to see. And it's interesting as well because through the unabridged journals of Sylvia Plath, we know how much she struggles with this and how much she struggles to fit into the conservative and traditional values that society has set on women. I just think I'm kind of quite honestly obsessed with The Bell Jar so far. I know I haven't read that much, but this is a 234-page book. I am almost 100 pages in. There's also a lot of white privilege. We cannot forget this. And there's also some language that I am not a fan of. Yeah, it's very derogatory for people of color and also people with disabilities, which is not great. It's not fun. And I do know that sometimes we do need to take into consideration the time that the books were written in, but I just feel like that's an excuse. I don't really appreciate either way the use of those terms. First, they don't add anything to the story, and second of all, just why? Just why? It should have never been part of your vocabulary in the first place. I don't care what time this was written on, but that's just like a personal thing. I know a lot of people just say, hey, it's part of the times. I know, but like, I don't care. That just sounds like an excuse to me. I think the more that I read, the more that I will see our main character sort of alienating herself from herself. I think that she's walking towards this ultimately tragic ending. I don't know how this ends, but from the writing and from the tone of the story, I think I have a good idea of how this is going to end, which would honestly be in theme with the other two books that I've read. Honestly, like, they're both very existential and very depressing. I'm really excited to continue the bell jar. I'm definitely going to be keeping you guys updated. Hopefully you guys are enjoying the video so far. As I've been recording this video, of course, some other books have been popping up on my Instagram apart from the 3 that I have already been reading. So I was thinking, if you guys like volume 1, do let me know in the comments below and maybe I'll do a part 2 of this. Because as I mentioned in the introduction, these books are way out of my comfort zone, but so far I've been having such an interesting and fascinating experience, and I feel like I wouldn't have had this reading experience if it weren't for this challenge that I set for myself. Definitely let me know if you guys are enjoying this, and I will do a part 2 just for you guys. And yeah, I think I'm just gonna go back to reading because I honestly just cannot wait to see how the story is going to unfold. I cannot wait to see just how more unhinged our character can become. I feel like unhinged is definitely like the topic, the theme for this video, which is interesting. There's something there that somebody should explore. Why are all of Bookstagram's most popular books about unhinged women? Just wanted to give you guys that little update, and now I'm gonna go back to reading and losing my mind. Here's the thing, I finished reading The Bell Jar 30 minutes ago and I wanted to record my reaction just like as soon as I finished the book, but that book made me spiral into this mindless state of being. And I literally just stared outside my window with sad music playing on the background. And I don't think I've come up from that state just yet. I still feel like I'm trying to swim back up to the surface. I can't really push it any further. I do need to speak about The Bell Jar, written by Sylvia Plath. I wouldn't say it's fun. I wouldn't say it's lighthearted. It's almost quite the opposite of that. And I think this was like the perfect way to end this sort of experiment, because as I was reading The Bell Jar, I found so many parallels to the other 2 books that I've read, which have been My Year of Rest and Relaxation and The Virgin Suicides. There's a lot of parallels, as I mentioned, in The Bell Jar of these 2 characters that we are following in these 2 very different books. That's sort of almost like a metaphor of how all of these books base their stories on the same themes and the same motifs. That was totally unplanned. Obviously, when I first picked up these books, I had no idea what they were about, and I had no idea what they sort of intended as they were telling these stories. And the fact that they almost sort of tell the same exact story, just with different narratives, but like to its core, the message stays the same. And it's that women have it rough. There is a reason that these women are so unhinged. There is a reason that we are following their descent into madness, and I don't blame them for it. I really don't. So that's definitely something that I wanted to mention to you guys, because even though I didn't plan this, these were just some of the books that I just kept on seeing over and over again on my Explore page. Who would have thought that they would be so similar to each other and that they would have like this underlying connection that I had no idea was going to be there, and that just kind of blew my mind. But back to The Bell Jar. The Bell Jar is, to me, a really interesting and fascinating book because it manages to mix in the story of this young girl who's called Esther and her descent into madness because of her mental illness, while also exploring the limited roles that women had in 1950s American society. The way that Plath explores these limiting circumstances for women at the same time as our character just keeps on falling deeper and deeper into her depression. It's almost like she's making a connection between the expectations that society has on women and the deterioration of her mental health. Our main character is more focused on her academic excellence and doing things that actually bring her joy, like writing and poetry and doing things that feed her creativity, instead of the traditional ideals of women in the 1950s set on by men of just becoming a housewife and giving men children and cooking and cleaning and not really doing anything besides working for the man. And our main character sort of deviates from that path, and because of this and because of everybody else's expectations on Esther, her mental health does not survive this journey. We just see her slowly create this separation between her mind and her body. At one point, her body even becomes a stranger to herself. She can't come to terms with the fact that the person that she's seeing in the mirror is the person that she feels she is on the inside. And this utter disconnect between the mind and the body was such a fascinating theme for me to explore as I was reading this. Out of the 3 books that I read, this is the only one that I used tabs. I did annotate all of them, but I do feel like The Bell Jar was just like a tad more fascinating for me to do a deep analysis on. So I actually made up my own little exclusive annotation guide for The Bell Jar, and I used the purples to symbolize Esther's relationship with her mind and body, and also signs of her alienation from her own self. The blue one I used whenever there was talk of society's expectations on Esther or on women in general. And the green I used for whenever Sylvia Plath uses the symbol of the bell jar. And that brings me to what is probably the most important or the most symbolic quote of the bell jar, because it perfectly encapsulates what this story is about. If you don't know where the symbol of the bell jar comes from, Sylvia Plath uses this symbol as a way to describe how her mental illness feels, like how Esther's mental illness feels. She sort of feels like there's this bell jar that separates her from society and from everybody else. It just feels like everything is muffled and distorted behind this very oppressing bell jar. It also sort of symbolizes the fact that her mental illness descends on her like a bell jar. She has no control over it. She has no way of stopping this. It's not something that she chose. Obviously, with every type of mental illness, it's not something that you just pick and choose. And she uses the bell jar to symbolize how Esther's mental illness feels to her. If you don't want to be fully spoiled on what happens on the bell jar, I'm not going to spoil the ending, but I will spoil basically most of the story. So if you don't want to be acquainted with that, skip to this time frame and you will be safe. Esther's mental illness drives her to try and end her life. And because of this, she actually ends up in an asylum where she is given different types of treatment that were very popular in the 1950s, like electrocution or shock therapy. She was also given like injections of insulin, which didn't really do much. And as she's in this asylum, she meets these different types of people, different types of patients with different problems and different circumstances. And we just spend quite a lot of time in the asylum as she's beginning to heal and beginning to sort of lift the bell jar from her mind. But then the thing is, right, like 2 pages before we're done, she hits us with this. But I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure at all. How did I know that someday at college, in Europe, somewhere, anywhere, the bell jar with its stifling distortions wouldn't descend again? Even though she's past like the danger zone, she still has that fear, that ever-present fear that the bell jar will descend on her. Even after she leaves the asylum, she can still feel the presence of the bell jar, and she's so afraid that it's just going to get worse all over again. If we're taking this as an autobiography, which I do believe it is, because there are so many mentions of things that Sylvia has said in her unabridged journals. There are so many things that are reflected in the book. If we take this as an autobiographical sort of story, Sylvia sort of answers this question of whether the bell jar is going to descend on her again, because a month before this book was published, Sylvia Plath took her own life. Like the bell jar did indeed descend on her once again. And I just think that's truly tragic. Like, the book ends in a hopeful note, but at the same time, it's not. Because if you know what happens to Sylvia Plath, and if you know just how futile all of her efforts were in trying to get better and trying to move past this, it's so sad. It's literally so depressing. And that's why when I finished The Bell Jar, I was just left with a feeling of emptiness and nothingness, because even through all of the struggles that our main character went through, even through everything that happened, she leaves this asylum, and yet our author, the creator of this character, basically never leaves it. Honestly, it fits like the theme of this video, because all of these books were depressing and sad. These are literally sad girl hours. I was not aware of that. Nowhere in the Instagram post that I saw did they mention that these were sad girl books. But apparently I have been bamboozled. I have been tricked into welcoming my sad girl era. I was not prepared for that, but hey, better embrace it than fight it, you know what I mean? I don't think I have finished talking about my annotation guide. I'm so sorry, my mind is no longer inside of me. I think the last one that I mentioned was the symbol of the bell jar, which I use green tabs for, and then the last one is the yellow tab, which I used to symbolize moments that I felt were taken right from Sylvia's life. Because as I mentioned earlier on, I do feel like this is very autobiographical. I feel like there are so many bits and pieces of Sylvia in this book. Because I am reading the unabridged journals of Sylvia Plath, I just feel like this reading experience was enriched in ways that I wasn't even aware of. This story hit me even harder because I knew where these feelings and these sentiments were coming from. I realized that this isn't just a fictional character. This is quite literally feelings and thoughts that Sylvia herself has thought. And that just made the story that much more realistic and that much more tragic. Yeah, it was a lot. As you can see, I have a lot of feelings for the bell jar and for Miss Sylvia Plath. I think there is so much to learn and there is so much to dissect in this book. Again, it was a perfect way to end this experiment because the bell jar did a really good job at summarizing some of the aspects of the first 2 books and also, you know, including some of its own. It was an experience, to say the least. Understatement of the year, totally, definitely. I do find myself a little bit surprised to see that I enjoyed all of these books, and it's this weird sort of enjoyment because you cannot be a normal human being. You cannot be happy and love these books. You definitely have to go through some things in life in order to appreciate these books and what they symbolize and what they mean. The fact that I enjoyed these books, even though they deal with such heavy matters, and the fact that there's literally not a single happy moment in any of these books, I don't know what that says about me. I don't know how many red flags I've raised in this video, but don't worry, I'm good, or I will be. Trust me, I'm good, but apparently I've found like this new genre or like this new category of books that I love and treasure and have a lot of fun reading. Again, I feel like fun is the weirdest word to use in this circumstance with such depressing books, but I mean, I can't lie. The way that these authors brought these characters and these stories to life was just very ingenious. I just had a great time doing this experiment. My expectations for this reading experiment, I feel like they were surpassed. Honestly, I was not expecting to have such a visceral reaction to these books. I did not expect to enjoy them so much. I'm still so weirded out by that, but I'm starting to accept it. You know what I mean? Deranged, unhinged, sad, depressed, you name it. These women are just not okay. Anyways, let me know what you guys thought of this experiment. Let me know if you've read any of these books or if you are now planning on reading these books because of my reviews and my reactions. Let me know if there are any other popular books that you've seen on Instagram that you would like for me to read and give them a try, because this definitely took me out of my comfort zone, but I had so much fun. So I feel like Bookstagram definitely has a few treasures hidden here and there. So I'm definitely interested to see if there are any other books that Bookstagram can introduce to me and change my life. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And if you did, remember to subscribe. It really does help. Come on now. Also like, that would be great. And comment. Oh my God, sorry. I feel like I'm asking too much of you, but I am going to go now, but I really do hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Bye.
Hey Jimmy, you nice, keep going.